Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us on another episode of Decrypting IT. I'm your host, Ashley Wallace, Client Success Lead here at Catalyst Network Group. Today, we're joined by Alec Fenton. He's the VP of Security Operations at Foresite. Alec has an extensive background spanning 14 years in cybersecurity itself and over 18 years in IT. Alec brings a wealth of experience from his prior leadership roles at MDR and MSSP companies, as well as working in private company security space for finance and healthcare verticals. And Foresite, you may be asking, who is Foresite and what are they doing with Catalyst? So Foresite is our MSSP partner, and they're a global cybersecurity provider that specializes in 24/7 threat monitoring, detection, and response. So they deliver advanced managed SIM and SOC services to help businesses stay ahead of those evolving threats that we're seeing out there in the wild today. Through our partnership with Catalyst, Foresite's dedicated security operations center and advanced tools like their new Google SecOps integration, we bring those directly to our clients, giving enterprise level security without the complexity of managing that in-house. Today, we're going to be talking about why security monitoring is critical and what threats are out there right now and how advanced managed services like Foresite's partnership with Google SecOps and with Catalyst are helping businesses stay secure in this constantly ever evolving threat landscape that we're seeing out there. So thanks again for joining us, Alec. We appreciate you being on.
Oh, no problem. It's great to see you again, Ashley. And looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Let's get right into it. So I want to talk about the value of monitoring and so we can get a really good understanding to folks out there on why it's so critical for organizations to have that continuous monitoring when it comes to their cybersecurity and their security posture. So can you kind of guide us through why that is so critical?
Sure. Yeah. One of the main principles on the cybersecurity side is that, knowing thy network, being able to see all the different areas and how those connect. As, security has evolved over time, it's kind of reached into all aspects of any part of a company, for the supply chain on your product internally, or even, external communications or connectors into third parties. So it's branch into every space we can think of. We've seen cyber attacks on all areas of a supply chain, from packaging and supplying to records and medical sides, and what those kind of impacts look like on a business is sometimes hard to measure. But now it's kind of bled into every nook and cranny of the company as a whole. So having that visibility can be really valuable for the company, as both on a cybersecurity landscaping aspect, as well as just like the business risk tolerance on them, on like where critical outages can affect revenue, can affect uptime, can affect order shipping. All those different aspects can come spiraling down very quickly in the midst of a major cyber incident, or even small ones here and there when we talk like phishing attempts or phishing successes, where they inject themselves or get into a process, or unfortunately they may fraud out financial items that are impact into that customer environment.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that to light. I think that sometimes when we talk about these things, and you can lose what the end impact is going to be, right? Like,
All right.
so, and halting business operations and what the revenue impact is there. I think sometimes we lose sight of what that can actually be to any specific organization, and sometimes it's different for others. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's definitely critical that we understand those. What are some of the challenges that led to clients partnering with Foresight? What are some of the major pain points that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, typically it's the staffing for 24/7 monitoring can be really difficult on a private company. I know I've been in a position where I built out a SOC internally, and you start getting into those headcounts of 12 to 15 analysts is typically what you would need for a full 24/7 monitoring operation.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times partnering with an MDR company helps you supplement a lot of that, especially in the off hours and the weekend, and kind of leverage that as an extension of your team. Sometimes the price points can be a little rough when you look at it at first, and then you start drilling into like how many headcount you might be saving, how much tech space you can maybe pull back on and consolidate into a single provider. And the value add gets pretty apparent really quickly. And then for some of the smaller companies, um, getting your team to be able to focus on those higher level direct business impacting issues, and then some of those more low level maintenance and hygiene type items, so can be offloaded into that MDR company to give you that better position. And also doing those kind of comparisons across that MDR company's like customer base and what's going on in the wild, to kind of compare yourself to what your maybe your peers in your vertical are doing, and then maybe what also complications they run into to take full advantage of that kind of lessons learned model. Whereas a private company may not see a major incident
Right.
for like a full year or so on, but we know that it's probably an inevitability that they might see something. And if someone else has already had those pain points, we want to make sure that's going into recommendations that we're providing from our end for like where you can get improvements or mitigations and at least stop the bleeding or limit the exposure as much as possible.
Yeah, it's almost like you can do more with less, so to speak. When you're trying to run that in-house, it's probably a lot more higher cost than when you're looking at taking it to you guys and specializing in that and looking at those threats on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely gets a big value add for a lot of the the CISOs and SOC directors that we talk to. It's one of the big pain points is how they can keep their budgets under control and consolidate and focus on the real business impacting items and less on those like we were talking about those lower level the hygiene items this additional enrichments and also like when we start talking about like adaptions in the new technologies you're having that learning curve, but maybe if you have an MDR company, they can kind of lean on those expertise that they might have with another customer to get you a bit of a head start. So those ramp up times for implementing new tech and either like, the firewall, IAM, networking, EDR spaces can really be a cost benefit for like that mean time to actionable for those type of tool sets. So we've seen some really positive results there and, utilizing, companies even like Catalyst for your, network and infrastructure deployments and then, Foresite for, additional cyber resiliency and additional cyber intel feeds and just taking the expertise to a full advantage and implementing it across your environment can be really advantageous for any customer that's trying to keep budgets under control, keep headcounts under control, and we're really worried what's going to affect their direct business and less on the global landscape and the chaos that's happening around them and be able to kind of focus in on their area.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna ask you what's the benefit of using a SIM or SOC versus their own security tools, and we just talked about that. So thanks for answering that. And this is
Oh, no.
before I even asked. Um, what are some of the misconceptions that you would say that you're running into about them running their own security operations, organizations running their own security operations?
And I think a lot of it, I mean, putting my former roles and stuff like that in place, was always a limiting factor when you had to focus on a business aspect, but then also, you're really deep into the head count and how you're evolving people. And in those private companies, it sometimes is hard to keep that training aspect where you have to keep that 24/7 operations going. You have to keep the
Mhm.
monitoring. To be able to supplement that with MDR company kind of frees you up to then also train your own resources, get more familiarized with the different tool sets you have and less, worry on how those initial alerts are going through. Because typically for any environment, there's that kind of cascade of, the amount of logs you get into the amount of detections that are triggered to alerts to incidents, and that kind of funnels down. But when you're taking that all internally, you're having to do all that work to get to that, funnel point where you have that high integrity alerting going on to where you're not getting just constant noise because the amount of wasted cycles that can happen during that is a pretty tedious thing to kind of dig through. And I know with some of those companies that I've seen in the past, that's usually one of the biggest benefits is that they can kind of push some of those over to the MDR side to help with all that funneling and consolidating and making sure that we're focusing on the real value adds for what we're focusing our detections on, high integrity, actionability, and not just kind of that chasing our tails trying to figure things out. And then you also get that benefit of having that outside in view. While it's like an extension of your team, for working those security alerts, you also get that added expertise in like other environments or what's going on in the rest of the ecosystems across the US and the world in general and what those kind of attacks might lead to or what they can uncover.
Yeah,
And hopefully help and validate, the stuff that you may were trying to focus on, like what you're doing for board presentations or so on. And, having additional evidence to kind of not be an echo chamber fully, but at least hopefully validating what your team's working on and what your team's pushing for and giving you further evidence to support those type of incentives or
yeah,
initiatives. Sorry.
that's great. I like that you bring that up about being able to leverage the knowledge that you guys have across your whole client base. That's huge. It kind of gives them a good benchmark to understand where they're at compared to others and being able to leverage that expertise. So that's awesome. They definitely aren't going to get that when you're running their own security operations, right? So it's a huge benefit. Are there any specific risks that you would say? Do you feel like even with a great, internal security operations happening, what are some of the risks? Like, what do you think they're not they may miss? What are some of the misses that they may see that they're not going to
Yeah.
have with Foresight services?
Yeah, I think that is that kind of that expertise level of seeing more exposure. Because I know when you're in that
Mhm.
private company, there is that kind of limitation on you only see what you have visibility to in that area.
Mhm.
And there's that heavy load to actually keep up with all the different threat intel feeds, the changes, different exploits being run in the wild, and how we consolidate that up. So having a company like Foresite and Catalyst to be able to kind of consolidate those down so we can focus on what's going to actually be relevant to your network, because the amount of noise that can generate in the cybersecurity community can be very loud, and it's hard to kind of hear all the different voices through the forest type situation. And I think that definitely is one of the biggest ads, just because I've seen that with some smaller companies. It's just very hard to pull their head out sometimes because there's so many things happening in their environment that they can't really take a look at the rest of the world to kind of see where that might apply, and making those correlations to like specific attack or advanced persistent threats or threat actor groups that are out there in the wild, and that something that looked somewhat monotonous or small for an environment that was we got it contained and so on and so forth, but then you start digging deeper and you find that it's a maybe a larger issue, and that there might be more to come, and then there's ways to jump ahead of some things, because that's always the kind of fight we run into is the proactive versus reactive. Like everyone
Right.
wants to go into that proactive state as much as possible, but then you also have to have some flexibility to be reactive and fast acting when something does come up to into the environments.
Yeah, kind of getting the best of both worlds there, because I know we're definitely doing a lot of things to stay in the proactive space, but great that you pointed out the reactive as well. You guys are Johnny on the spot when it comes to to getting to those alerts, so that's great. Looking at the Google SecOps, let's talk about that because I'm very interested. I know this has been something that's newer that you guys have partnered with Google SecOps. So, what does that bring to the table as in terms of advanced SIM capabilities that clients are receiving?
Yeah, it does open up a lot of different things, because obviously Google being such a big entity in this space, and for the most part they're almost in that kind of newer age of like we've had Catalyst, or sorry, Chronicle was one of their platforms originally, and now it's evolved in this whole SecOps platform, and you're taking advantage of the expertise in Google's side for all things cloud and infrastructure and things of that nature. And then you get the Mandiant aspect for threat intelligence and incident response actions. And a lot of that all feeds into the platform natively. So you get a large advantage on that for like what the threat intel looks like, what the fidelity rate looks like, and how it's those alerts are going to be actionable and relevant to your environment. Not to say that the legacy systems don't have really good capabilities in there, as they've been built over time, but the kind of native approach in Google to have those AI integrations that are helping in the back end to look at here's the log correlations, here's the what this detection is going through, and give you a kind of a head start into like understanding those alerts and how they come through, and also just like your general attack surface profile on like everything in your environment. It can kind of go through and maybe even make recommendations off just what's been logged and been ingested into the system, and
Mhm.
take some of the human element out and put the human more into the validation of that last 20% of an alert, and not all the heavy lifting that goes into it. Essentially that analogy of the amount of paperwork it would take to get into
Yeah,
that level. Those AI integrations can really help with that enrichment, and this make the analysts and the customer side just more actionable at a quicker rate. So it's really interesting to see.
awesome. What was I going to mention? What did you mention? Fidelity? What the fidelity alerts? Okay, that's the first time
Mhm.
I've heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
What is
So
that?
it's essentially going into that the high fidelity of like how the detection is occurring, and it's kind of like a true
Got it.
positive, false positive type breakdown. You can get more granular with it, but usually in the fidelity state, it's talking about like, did the detection detect properly what it was aiming to do, or did some things get pulled into it? That leads into those tuning conversations, because there's always legacy software or internal processes or proprietary tech that can throw in those more global signatures to be a little more noisy than they need to be. So getting to that higher fidelity means that it's more actionable, more confidence around the actual criticality of it and what people should focus on. So yeah, fidelity gets into a big part of what we do on our tuning efforts, and making sure that there's only so much time in the day, and we have to focus on those major threats and those things that are actually actionable, and not so much the chasing ourselves or going down rabbit holes that kind of lead to a less benign type thing. But then also fidelity in the state of like what the criticality would be. So if we have a lot of confidence that it is something malicious, and there's all these different evidence bleeding it into that. We want to make sure we're expressing that to the customer, that there is, here's all the evidence leading on to why we made this conclusion and
Right.
why it's going to need emergency actions and so forth. And then the inverse of that, like seeing things that, look bad from the top level, but as you drill in, you find, oh, this is actually related to something as a known process. It might be more of a policy violation, something to review at your leisure, and less of a panic at 2 a.m. type call. So,
Right.
yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for the clarity there. I just had to ask. Like, oh, that's
Yeah.
a.
Good.
I don't know if I've heard that one before. So thanks for clarifying. I'm interested to see there over at Foresite what you guys are seeing as the most common threats. I know that some stuff's been changing, and obviously we talk about this all the time of threats continually evolving, especially with AI. So it's really cool to see that AI is integrated with Google SecOps, because I feel like you need that with just the advancements of threats that we're seeing come over. But what are some common threats that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis? What, maybe the top couple, because we probably wouldn't have time to get into all of them today. Like, there are a lot out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it, the usual highest one is going to be that phishing and, kind of targeted attacks, or sometimes just blanket attacks across the phishing landscape. And I know we kind of briefly talked about like the AI adaptation into the security, like SecOps and other, platforms, and like, how we're going through them. I'm sure everyone's heard all the buzzworthy items on how AI is being integrated into just about every aspect of our lives. On the other side of it, the attackers are even more incentivized to do that because it just leverages their speed, their
Yeah.
capabilities, and their reach even further. And you kind of had this term of, script kiddies back in when I first started, was a really prevalent thing that's only grown over time. And now AI has only made that more efficient. And, again, they go for the higher success rates, they go for all these things, or they're just going, taking what would normally be a very targeted campaign and being able to make it highly adaptable across a wide range of people. So we were starting to see some of those, come through, and I'm sure we'll continue to see that. I know, even internally for family members talking about, AI phone scams and impersonations and
Yes.
how they're
Yeah.
getting really good at, translating now. There's not that language barrier from, someone in Russia, Ukraine doing an attack against America, or there's going to be those translations. They're going to make it very even regional dialect changes and referencing to local restaurants. We've seen some really interesting attacks in that space. So, and it does kind of add that complexity on like how you're training for phishing on your environments. The other one would be the conditional access around cloud environments has always been a big one, because it's
Hmm.
a very big pain point for companies to kind of get that granularity in access controls. So you kind of get into that CIA triad of you start losing some of the confidentiality, integrity there for availability. And that does make it to where you have that kind of extra risk exposure, where if someone is, phishing someone, even someone behind the counter at a store or something like that, but their access isn't locked down to where if they get into their environment, they can all of a sudden spin up their own Azure apps, or in Google Space, they can do their own things, or AWS. So all those cloud environments have really good ability to keep that high access going on, but then you kind of run into
Yeah.
those problems if you don't have good controls around it. So we've seen that a few times in the Azure space where someone gets in, adds additional tools and cloud apps that can then exfiltrate email data, exfiltrate internal SharePoint data, things of that nature. And it's big issue there. And I know a lot of companies are recommending to get as much around that controlled access as possible. There's also the taking lay of the land on like where patch management and your infrastructure monitoring kind of gets into, is that it is hard for companies to kind of keep up with that level of 0 days coming out or critical vulnerabilities, and how you prioritize, because you do have to kind of have that business aspect where you're weighing the cost on taking down a system versus the impact of a potential incident.
Hmm.
And with how fast things move these days, it's very hard. Some companies even drill down to like how many minutes or seconds a system is down could affect their revenue stream, could affect things down the pipeline and on all aspects of their company. So there's that kind of prioritization and effort that has to go on where we can take those things and have the risk tolerance, and where we can kind of make some pullbacks where it's if it's a medium vulnerability, maybe we can push it out a couple weeks. But with those criticals, like making sure we're business justifying that has to be fixed, because the cost might be $10,000 to a POC type system that you're not having active, but you
Yeah.
could be facing like $1 million impacts on if they got into your infrastructure, pivoted into critical areas. You think of the horrible stories around malware and different crypto based items where they're encrypting your networks and your files, and that has even more catastrophic impact on the business as a whole.
Yeah, and we're getting into like making sure we've got incident response plans locked down and perimeter defenses and strong points. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thanks for sharing the expertise and all the important work that you guys are doing at Foresite and us with here at Catalyst. We appreciate obviously your partnership. And for listeners, if you guys have questions about how you can better protect your organization from cyber attacks or breaches, or you just want to learn more about cybersecurity solutions from Catalyst and Foresite, please reach out to us by visiting catalystng.com. That's catalystng.com. Or you can email us at podcast@catalystng.com. And don't forget to hit subscribe. We're also going to be including the link below to our 2025 annual cybersecurity report. If you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, please do. Super insightful. You'll be able to collect a lot of information from there as well. And again, thanks for joining us on Decrypting IT today. Until next time, stay secure and stay ahead.